Imagine this. It's the 4th of July. You know, the classic American celebration.
Mhm.
Fireworks, maybe some barbecue smells in the air. Perhaps even a White House picnic happening.
Right, quintessential Americana.
Exactly. Now, picture that specific day, July 4th, 2025. It wasn't just a holiday. It became the day a huge piece of legislation was signed, something set to, well, reshape the country for years and maybe decades.
We're talking about the Big Beautiful Bill, yeah. Officially the One Big Beautiful Bill Act.
That's the one. It was quite a moment, wasn't it? Signing something that big on Independence Day.
Oh, absolutely. The symbolism merging with the actual lawmaking, a bill this large on that date, it really signals the kind of impact it's expected to have, touches everything.
For sure. And that's what we're here to do today on the Deep Dive. We want to unpack this monumental bill.
Get into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, look at what's actually in it, trace how it got through Congress, and believe me, that was a real fight. Contentious, doesn't quite cover it.
Not even close.
And then explore what it means, the effects it's already having, and the projected impacts on the economy, and crucially, on people's everyday lives.
Right. We want you, the listener, to get a handle not just on the bullet points, but why this bill is such a big deal for your wallet, your healthcare, maybe even the whole direction the country's heading.
It's not just about a law. It's about the forces behind it,
Mm.
the choices made, and, well, the ripples spreading out from those choices.
Exactly. Where do we start? The blueprint.
Let's crack it open. The bill's blueprint. First up, tax cuts. This was positioned as more take-home pay for a lot of folks.
A core piece is extending those 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act provisions, making them permanent.
So, like the corporate tax rate cut, from 35% down to 21%.
It's a big one, yeah,
Yeah.
made permanent. Also, doubling the standard deduction, which, simplifies things for many people and lowers their taxable income.
More money in their pockets, potentially. And lower rates for most income brackets, too.
But it wasn't just extending old stuff. There were brand new breaks introduced, things that got a lot of attention.
Like what?
Well, eliminating federal income tax on tips completely. That's obviously popular with service industry workers.
Huge deal for them, I imagine.
And similarly, getting rid of taxes on Social Security income, a major point for retirees.
So, very targeted benefits,
Yeah.
aimed at specific groups.
It seems like it, yeah. A strategy perhaps focused on certain voter blocks, maybe less on broad economic theory this time, potentially trading some long-term fiscal caution for immediate political appeal.
Okay, so those are tangible benefits for some. But the economic debate, that's where it gets complicated, right?
Always does with taxes. You had analyses like from the Tax Foundation saying, okay, maybe a nearly 1% boost to GDP in the long run.
Which sounds good on the surface.
But, and this is a big but, the same analysis pointed to something like a $4.0 trillion loss in government revenue over 10 years.
$4 trillion, wow. That goes straight to the deficit then.
Directly. And this is where you see the split. Some folks, like strategists at Citi, saw it as an economic positive, a tailwind.
A boost for growth.
Right. But others, like Morgan Stanley, raised red flags, serious ones, about whether the country can actually afford this long-term. Fiscal sustainability concerns.
So does the short-term growth, if it happens, outweigh piling on that much debt? That's the core question there.
That really is the multi-trillion-dollar question, isn't it?
And it leads us right to the other side of this bill, the spending cuts. Because that $4 trillion revenue loss has to be balanced somehow, or at least that's the argument.
And this is where the social safety net really feels the impact. We're talking about major reductions.
Not major.
Well, the headline number is $1.2 trillion cut from Medicaid and SNAP food stamps over the next decade.
$1.2 trillion. That's enormous. What does that mean in human terms?
Let's take Medicaid. In 2024, it covered something like 80 million low-income Americans, these cuts. Estimates suggest maybe 11.8 million people could lose their health insurance.
Millions losing coverage. That's staggering. And SNAP, food stamps.
That program helps around 42 million people a month. The cuts could mean lower benefits, and we're already seeing places, I think Colorado was mentioned, discussing tighter work requirements to even qualify.
So it's not just less money, it could be harder to even get the help.
Exactly. It feels like a fundamental shift, potentially. A renegotiation of that social contract idea. Pushing more responsibility onto states, maybe onto individuals themselves. Redefining what the safety net even means.
So states might have to find the money themselves. Or just cut people off.
That seems to be the potential outcome. Either cover more costs, which is tough for state budgets, or tighten the rules significantly. Imagine being a family caught in that squeeze.
Yeah, figuring out how to pay for medicine or groceries suddenly, it's profound.
It really is. The long-term effects on vulnerable populations could be huge.
Okay, so we've got tax cuts, major spending cuts. What else is core to this bill? Immigration, right? That got a lot of headlines.
A huge focus. Fortifying the border was a central theme, and the funding reflects that.
How much funding?
A massive $45 billion allocated just for migrant detention centers. Plus, more money for border wall construction and a significant boost in resources for ICE.
$45 billion for detention centers alone. Wow. Any other changes?
There's also a new $100 fee to apply for asylum. It was initially proposed much higher, like $1,000, but still it's a new barrier.
And the reaction to this part?
Yeah.
Predictably divided.
Completely. Supporters will tell you these are vital steps for border security, for control. Critics argue it's incredibly expensive, potentially inhumane, and likely to worsen conditions in detention facilities that are often already described as overcrowded.
Just starkly different views on the same policy. Which brings us to how something this polarizing actually passed. The legislative journey.
Oh, it was a saga, a real legislative labyrinth, as you called it. It culminated, of course, with President Trump signing it on July 4th, 2025 at that White House picnic.
But getting it to his desk, that was the battle.
Textbook party line stuff. Really dramatic. The House vote, July 3rd, super tight, 218 to 214.
Close. Any Democrats support it?
Zero. Not a single one. It apparently came down to some intense late-night talks involving Trump and Speaker Mike Johnson. Real arm twisting, probably.
And the Senate. Was that any easier?
Even tighter. That vote was July 1st. It passed 51 to 50.
50-50. So the vice president broke the tie.
Exactly. Vice President J.D. Vance cast the deciding vote. And that apparently only happened after a key meeting with Senator Lisa Murkowski, who everyone was watching as a possible swing vote.
So it's scraped through on purely partisan lines by the absolute narrowest of margins.
Which says a lot, doesn't it? Passing something this huge with zero bipartisan buy-in, it feels precarious. Makes you wonder about its staying power if the political landscape changes.
That's a really good point. Legislation passed like that often feels less stable, maybe more likely to be challenged or reversed later.
Definitely. It lacks that broad public acceptance from the get-go.
Which leads us right into the ripple effect.
Yeah.
Public reaction, economic reality. Let's start with the money again. That deficit number.
The $3.3 trillion question? Yeah, that's the CBO's projection, the Congressional Budget Office. They estimate this bill adds $3.3 trillion to the deficit over 10 years.
$3.3 trillion. On top of what was already, what, $36 trillion in national debt?
Roughly, yeah. Around $36.2 trillion at the time, so adding significantly to an already enormous number.
And the timing. Wasn't the economy looking a bit shaky around July 2025 anyway?
That's the other concerning part. There were reports, from groups like the Conference Board, EY, pointing to a summer slowdown, maybe linked to tariffs partly.
I remember hearing about GDP actually decreasing in a lot of states.
Yeah, the BEA data showed GDP down in 39 states around that time. So you've got a slowing economy.
And you inject massive deficit spending into it. What are the risks there?
Well, the classic concern is inflation, pushing prices up for everyday goods, and potentially leading to higher interest rates, which makes mortgages, car loans, credit cards more expensive for everyone.
So it's a gamble. Trying to boost things? Maybe, but risking overheating or making debt more costly.
It's definitely walking a fine line. Adding this kind of fiscal stimulus, or maybe burden, depending on your view, into an uncertain economy, it adds complexity, volatility.
And the government's own borrowing costs could go up too, right? If interest rates rise generally.
Precisely. It makes financing that huge national debt even more expensive, a potential feedback loop.
Okay, so economically complex, potentially risky. How did the public take it? What did people think?
Well, a Washington Post Ipsos poll around that time showed a really divided picture, a real mixed bag.
Some parts popular, some not.
Exactly. People generally liked certain things. The child tax credits got support, and that elimination of taxes on tips, very popular.
Makes sense. Tangible benefits.
But then strong opposition to other parts. The cuts to food stamps were unpopular. And that $45 billion for detention centers also faced significant opposition.
So people liked the benefits, disliked the cuts and some of the spending. What about the overall debt impact?
That was maybe the most telling number. 60%, 60 of people surveyed said the projected $3 trillion debt increase was unacceptable.
60% unacceptable. Wow, that really shows how polarizing the whole package was. Even if you liked one part, you might hate another or just hate the overall cost.
Right. It highlights that tension, doesn't it, between maybe getting an immediate personal benefit and worrying about the country's long-term finances.
And political leaders, other big names, their reactions reflected that divide.
Absolutely. Critics were loud. Liz Schuler from the AFL-CIO called it the worst job-killing bill, claimed it took healthcare from $17 million to give a $5 trillion gift to the wealthy. Strong words.
Wow. Any political predictions?
Yeah, the DNC chair, Ken Martin, predicted Republicans would pay a heavy price in the midterms because of it, especially in those swing districts.
But the supporters had a totally different story, I assume.
Completely opposite narrative. President Trump, his allies, they framed it as delivering a blue-collar boom. They were promising like over $10,000 average increases in take-home pay.
Blue-collar boom versus job-killing bill. Very clear battle lines drawn there.
Extremely clear. And it wasn't just politicians. You had figures like Elon Musk publicly criticizing the debt increase.
Really? What happened then?
Well, that led to a pretty public back and forth with President Trump, who brought up government subsidies Musk's companies had received. So even drawing in big business figures into the fray.
Man, this thing touched everything. So it's obvious this bill was going to be a major, maybe the major issue in the next elections.
Absolutely pivotal, especially in those swing districts where elections are won and lost. The debate definitely wasn't over when the bill was signed. It just moved into the public square, onto the campaign trail.
Oh, political football, like you said earlier, destined to shape the political conversation for a long time.
No doubt about it. It set the terms of debate for years to come, potentially.
Okay, so let's try to wrap this deep dive up. The big, beautiful bill signed July 4th, 2025. Undeniably a landmark law.
Huge implications. Promises of tax cuts, the idea of boosting growth.
But paired with deep cuts to social programs, things like Medicaid and SNAP.
And adding, trillions to the national debt, it's a package that hit a lot of different nerves.
Ignited strong feelings, divided the country.
For sure. And we're still seeing the full effects unfold, right? It's shaping the economy, shaping individual lives in ways we're probably still figuring out.
Whether you view it as, I don't know, a masterstroke to the economy or a massive fiscal blunder.
Or something in between.
Right. It's undeniable that it changed the conversation. It reset the parameters for how we talk about taxes, spending, the role of government, the safety net, all of it.
It really did. So maybe here's a final thought to leave you with, something to chew on.
Okay.
How might a bill like this, one that so fundamentally rewires both the economic incentives and the social safety net, all passed on Independence Day, how might that ultimately redefine our collective reliance on government? Or maybe our expectations of self-sufficiency? What does that look like decades down the road?
That's a deep question. Does it push people towards more self-reliance out of necessity? Or change how we view government support altogether?
Exactly. It's a question that goes beyond just the dollars and cents, touching on, well, the very idea of the American social contract. And that's a conversation that will likely continue long after this bill is old news.